let's talk about housing challenges here, because America is, everybody knows, facing this sort of affordability crisis when it comes to one of the most fundamental aspects of the American dream, and that is owning a home. With the backing of the White House, the Senate this week is going to be passing this bipartisan bill that strives to build, baby, build in a way. It incentivizes construction. It incentivizes restoring sort of aging houses and abandoned buildings, expediting environmental reviews. But in New York and a lot of these high cost areas where there are more renters than owners, the focus has actually turned to rent control. Mamdani, you guys know, rose to victory on this promise. Freeze the rent. That was the campaign promise, right? But while a lot of those proposals, they might have good intentions behind them, they can sometimes lead to bad results, and not just sometimes, a lot of times. I mean, if you look at a lot of these cities, doing rent control, they cap it below inflation increases, which, sets the property owners back tremendously. They have to pay the mortgage, they've got to pay the property taxes, maintenance, improvements, and sometimes they end up not renting at all because of all these restrictions. Sean, you are a rental property owner yourself. What are some of
Very
these
kind word.
what are some of these unintended consequences of rent control? Because we're gonna, I mean, there's a movement that way, not just in New York, but with some progressive cities across the country. What are some of the unintended consequences of those?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I bought my first home in 1999, and it was through a first-time homeowner program, and it was like the equity in that helped me buy the next one. I still own the first house that I moved into. It wasn't like I went out to be some kind of rent control guy, but it has given me that the owning property is I think one of the greatest keys to the American dream. Like, you build equity, it's generational wealth that you can hand off. But what Democrats are doing right now is trying to stifle that. Rachel, you said this. I don't really make a ton of money off any of my properties at all. In fact, this was our long-term retirement. We own the place that my wife lived in as well. So they don't make money. Because if you think about the monthly mortgage, condo fee in the case of a couple of them, that goes up tremendously as well. It's not about the monthly it's about the long term, the equity that you build. And if you turn off that ability to just pay the bill, right? I mean, I honestly, I wouldn't, I'd have to sell the property. And again, what do you get? You literally go in reverse, because who ends up buying it? Institutional investors, people right now. You'll kill the ability for a lot of people to do what I did, which is start to create some generational wealth, start to build some equity that they can use to either buy a future house, to help with their kids' education. My parents did that. That's literally how I got through college. They had bought some condos and then refurbed them and sold them. You will cut that off. If people can't pay the basic mortgage on an investment property, then they're not going to do it anymore. And this is where, again, what I love about Congress and local people is that everybody wants to tell everyone else what to do with their money, and most of them have no experience in this.
So in many ways, this is a sort of a failed experiment that has already been tried and actually abandoned. If you go to St. Paul, Minnesota, voters there authorized rent controls that capped rent at like 3% growth, I believe, with no exception for inflation, by the way. Construction in the area slowed. Developer interest sort of dried up. Their requests for building permits dropped something like 80%, and property values ultimately decreased. And less than a year later, the city rolled it back. Dan, I'm wondering, are progressive Democrats, are they taking heed of these sorts of examples that didn't work, or is this a base play that doesn't, heed reason at this point?
Look, I think it was a base play. But here's the thing. There's this whole raging fight in the Democratic Party between what they call the abundance agenda, which is that you should have an abundance of things, abundance access to things, or this idea of socialism, of the government controlling, setting price, caps and government grocery stores, et cetera. And one of the things that's been this under the radar story is that Mamdani has begun to embrace with President Trump the idea of we need to build more. And I think lost in that is this idea that freezing rents is not a long-term solution to anything. Sean made the point about, inflation. It doesn't allow for adjusting as the cost of goods and services go. I mean, look, to buy the land, to construct something, to then run the maintenance on it, it often costs more than these rent freezes allow. So you get a lot of these buildings that are not good. By the way, classic Democratic issue, NIMBY, not in my backyard. People say, well, I don't want that housing next to me. I go put it somewhere else. And it does not incentivize developers to do anything about it. And so I think what you're now seeing in the Democratic Party is this idea that we need to get rid of the red tape that we have primarily built up. It is so expensive and time consuming to get the permitting to build in a lot of these cities. New York is a classic example, that you need to make it easier for people to build more and have greater supply. That in the long run, trying to use the government to freeze the free market and prevent the rise of costs is not sustainable. And Mamdani is kind of starting to back off of some of this. And so I think as Democrats fight about 2026 and 2028, what are we going to focus on? What are our solutions? You're starting to see signs that some of these socialist ideas are just not, people know they're great campaign slogans. They're not great in practice. And I think, you may see some activity on these, private equity and hedge funds buying up, hundreds and hundreds of properties. There does seem to be some bipartisan support for that. Thank you, Donald Trump. But I do think the idea of rent caps are just not smart. And you're seeing more and more Democrats beginning to realize that.
I mean, price controls in general, it's just price controls are just anti-American in general. I mean, it's just it's so against our society.
The fundamental thing that's so funny is they want to put the price control on one side, right? So when I was just looking for it, it was on the counter the other day. When Alexandria sends me the once a year, here's how much we're increasing your property taxes. They don't cap it. Like the city council just votes, hey, we're increasing the rate per thousand this much. So again, what am I supposed to eat that every year? What, like they want to cap what you can grow at, but they want to cap what they're going to raise the property rate. So the fundamental thing that I think is interesting about this is, one, Alexandria as a city, and I think a lot of cities could do that if they're not, has a program that helps first-time owners get into a condo or to a low, and that's the thing, is that everyone thinks that you deserve to buy a house right away. Maybe the first step is to buy a small townhouse, to buy a condo, you build some equity, you use that for the next step. That's frankly what I did. And there's nothing wrong with that, where you have to take the first step. The other thing is, from a federal government standpoint, the VA program, I think, is excellent, right? It helps veterans, low to nothing down, really assistance. You could do a similar program for first-time homeowners where you maintain a certain credit score. So this isn't going back to 2008, but you actually incentivize that aspect of it. But this is where I think, again, that side of the ledger is where we should be focused, not trying to cap stuff that hurts people from investing. And to Dan's point, you start telling me that I'm losing money, it makes it harder to then want to improve the property to keep it up. Yeah. Right. So it's every time the government gets involved and caps something, there's that old saying, you get less of what you tax and more of what you don't. And so when you tax it, you're going to get less improvements. You're going to get less investment. You're going to get less. Let the private sector solve this by incentivizing first-time homeowners to get in, because even in Section 8 housing, the studies show that when you give home ownership to people, that actually improves the area. They take more pride in it because it's theirs. That's where the government should be focused its efforts on, not capping stuff.
Well, and by the way, in half these rent-controlled areas in New York City, Mamdani got killed for this. You have people with lots of money in rent-controlled properties. You have Mamdani, whose assets are like 1.9 million. People could say, oh, that's not a lot of money in New York City. Well, yeah, it still is. And he's in a rent-controlled building. You're like, so then what are you going to try to do? Regulate people's incomes? To say, oh, it can only be so much. Well, what happens if you get a bonus? What happens if you have a good year? Do you have to get out then? You're going to kick people out? I mean, it's just trying to use the government.
The side of the ledger the government should be focused on is to get people moving in the right direction.
Correct. Build an abundance.
And by the way, this issue is one of those sleeper ones that we talk about all the time. Social media, AI, data centers, and what they're doing on housing. Because young people in particular, I think on both sides, but particularly on the Republican side, want to see some solutions. It was something that Charlie Kirk was really passionate about before he was killed.
But my question is, does the Democratic Party realize this? Or like you, Dan, you're saying you think they're starting to pivot on this and
look,
go back to
because here's the problem.
It's an easy campaign promise that doesn't make sense, of course, but it's you
can't use the government to freeze it and not build more housing. You have to create more housing. You have to build
Dan,
it.
the problem too is that there's
supply.
a balance. In Alexandria, go down Route 1. All they've done is continue to build up. Then what do? You put more pressure on schools and roads. And I mean, like, there is a balance, and they've got to figure this out. But I would say this, the other disparity in the parties is these Democrats rule from large urban cities, right? Yep. And Republicans, in a lot of ways, are looking at people who are buying a first-time home that's not necessarily in a city and have different needs. And that's why there's also a different approach to how they view this.